Alright, in this video we are talking about chord progressions. A chord progression is a series of chords, and a good one uses inversions to make transitions between chords very easy. So the cadences that we've practiced in this class are an example of chord progressions, where you go to the 1, the 4, the 1 to 5 to 1, and it's all using inversions to make it simple to get to those chords. These are going to help us with our songs because then we're not jumping around in root position, and once you have notated these chord progressions, then it'll be really easy to be playing through your songs and you're almost there ready to perform them. So we're going to use a fake chord progression that I've come up with, but it should replicate something like what you'll be doing. And so let's say, and this is what you'll do for the assignment, so let's say this is the chord progression I have. So I have an A chord, an F sharp minor chord, a B minor / D, a D over F sharp, and do write these in above the staff, and then an E7. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's say that these are the chords you have, and last week you notated them on this sheet that you turned in, and so I've done that here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick an inversion to start with our A chord. Now typically I like to use this one, the second inversion of a root position chord to start with, if that's the key that we're in. So if we're in the key of A, which we are in this one, usually that's the first chord in the song, I like to use a second inversion chord. You could really start with root position or first inversion. Any are fine, and it really depends on the song. But as a default, I will start with the second inversion just because I like the shape and the feel of that. So let's put those notes in here. So we have an E on the bottom, A, and then C sharp. Okay, so there's our A chord. Now we know that we need to get to an F sharp minor chord. So let's study these chords and figure out what is the same between them. You want to keep the common notes the same, and then you will usually only have one or two notes to move. So we have an A, a C sharp, and an E in the A chord. Now let's look at the F sharp minor chord here. Okay, so we have, in the A chord, we have an A, C sharp, E. What do we have in the F sharp minor chord here? We have an A. Okay, so that takes care of that one. A C sharp, that takes care of that one. And then we have an F sharp. Okay, so we only need to move the E to an F sharp. The other two can stay the same. So let's go back to our other page here. We said we can keep the A and the C sharp the same. So we'll move these over here. And then we said the E needs to become the F sharp. So instead of being here, it just moves up. So what we end up with is an F sharp minor chord in root position. And that's the easiest way to get from an A second inversion to a F sharp minor chord, because those two stay the same and this one moves up. Okay, we're going to do the same thing now from F sharp minor to B minor over D. Oh, one thing I forgot to do is this one we're using both hands. So we need to notate maybe the low A down here. And then for the F sharp minor, we'll go, let's say, to the lower F sharp there. And so this is what the left hand will be playing. If you're feeling a little more advanced, you could put these in octaves. Octaves just beef up the sound a little bit, so that's a nice way to do it. Okay, so now let's go from F sharp minor to B minor over D. Let's go back a page. We're looking at B minor and F sharp minor. So let's do kind of what we did before, except up here. What are the notes in an F sharp minor chord? We have an F sharp, an A, and a C sharp. And then in the B minor chord, we have B minor, or B, D, and F sharp. So the only one that's the same is F sharp. So let's go to our next page. We're going to keep that F sharp the same then. All right, so here's our F sharp. Now the other notes we needed were a D and a B. We could put the D down here, but if you look at how the F sharp minor chord is set up, everything is above the F sharp, and so moving the D down would be a hand shift. So I would say it'd be a good idea to move the D on top, and then we have our B in the middle, and that's our B minor chord. So we have one that stays the same, that would be here, and then those two move up. Now because this is a B minor over D, that affects what we do in the left hand. So that's why I'm having you do the left hand in this assignment, because we need to acknowledge that. Now I really want to make this clear. The inversion that you use up here has nothing to do with what the chord symbol indicates for the bass. So just because this is a B minor over D does not mean that this chord needs to have a D in the bottom. It just means the D needs to be the lowest pitch in the piano. Okay, let's move on. So B minor over D. Let's look at B minor to a D chord. So we will once again go back. So here's our B minor up here, and let's write those notes here now. B, D, F sharp, and we want to get to a D chord, which has D, F sharp, and A. So I see those two notes in common, which means the A or the B needs to turn into an A. Okay? Well, that's easy. If the B is the only one that changes, then the other two stay the same. So we have our D up there, our F sharp, and then our B becomes an A. Now let's look at the left hand. If we look up here, it says F sharp should be our lowest note, so we're going to put that in the bass. Let's put it there. Again, you could double octaves if you wanted to. All right, we're almost done here. So now let's look at the E7 chord. We're going from a D chord to an E7. Let's see what's in common here. So a D chord has D, F sharp, A. An E has E, G sharp, B, and D. Okay, so the only thing in common is this D, which means everything else will change. So let's go over here, and now we're going to shift down a little bit here. Okay, so we know that the D will stay the same, and since everything up here is below the D, it makes sense to keep the D the top right here, and everything else will be below it. So let's work down. So, well, we'll work from the bottom. So E would be the bottom. We have a G sharp. I'll come back to that sharp. Here we go. And there we go. And then in the bass, let's put an E. And if you want to, you could do octaves. All right. So let's play our chord progression now. So starting with the A chord, and I'm just going to do the right hand because it's a little hard to do on the iPad here with both hands. So here's the A chord, F sharp minor, B minor, D, and here's the E7. And probably that'll go back to an A chord, so let's just pretend that it does. If it goes back to an A, the E is in common. So we'll start with that E. And we're right back to where we started. And typically songs will have a progression like this where it's 4, maybe a little bit more chords that sort of loop through. And that might be the chorus might have one progression, and the verse might have a different progression, and the bridge might have a different progression. So you might need to do this process that we did maybe 3 times or so to get all of your progressions notated, but you don't need to do the entire song. So don't write out, pages and pages of this. Just do each progression one time so I can see what your plan is. Okay, one thing that I do want to notice, or take note of, is that you can omit notes. It's okay to omit notes in certain cases. For one case, 7th chords. How many E's do we have in this E7 chord right now? We've got 1, 2, 3. That's a lot of E's. So we can omit one, and it makes it easier to play. So what if we get rid of this E up top? I'll just redraw it. So then we would have everything but the E. There we go. So this would be a perfectly okay sound to make, where you just have an E in the bass, and then those 3 notes up top. That would be okay. It sounds just fine. You don't need to have 3 E's. So if you get to a 7th chord, feel free to omit the note that is in the bass. Another case that you could do if you really wanted to is, let's take this A chord for example. Let's say we didn't want to play all 3 notes there just because it's a little beefier sound than we want. So let's say we have the A down here. Well, let's put it down the octave and do both. If we really wanted to, we could get rid of the A that's here. The other thing we could do is we could also get rid of the E. Now, if you're going to omit anything, it's good to omit the 5th. And this would really go for the 7th chords too. The 5th is non-essential for our chords. And let me show you what I mean. So we could have the A in the bass for this A chord, and then another A, and then a C sharp. And it still sounds like an A chord. If we got rid of this note, it still sounds like an A chord, but that's because we have the root here. Now, if we have the 5th in there, but not the 3rd, it loses that sound of the C sharp, and that's the 3rd. And the other danger with that is it could be, what if you did this and you added this note instead? This would be a minor chord, and this would be a major chord. So if we omit the 3rd, it's ambiguous whether it's major or minor. So we don't omit thirds ever. And you wouldn't omit the root unless it's already in the bass. So if you have it in the bass, then you could do a 3rd and a 5th, and that's fine. But you wouldn't just do a 3rd and a 5th by itself, because then it sounds like a C sharp minor chord, or it's ambiguous at least. So you want to have the root. Sometimes you'll double that. And then you want to have a 3rd. For sure you want the 3rd. And then you can omit the 5th. Now back to the E7 example. We said omit the root because you have a lot of it already. And that's a fine sound. Now if you wanted to, you could even go as far as omitting the 5th up here. And that's what this would sound like. This would be root, 3rd, and 7th. And it still sounds like the right chord. If we omit the 7th, then it's just not a 7th chord. It would just be an E chord. If we omit the 3rd and do the 5th and 7th, we don't know if it's minor or major. So we need that 3rd, and we need the root, and we need the 7th to make it sound like a 7th chord. So you can omit the 5th in 7th chords. That's kind of the takeaway here. and seventh chords and main chords as well. Okay, so that's as far as we're going to go on this. I would like you to submit this assignment, and it should look something like what I've done here. You don't need to draw these lines like I did here, although you can if they're helpful to you. Really all I need is the notes drawn and the chord symbols. Make sure to do both hands for this. As you saw, I almost forgot, so maybe remind yourself or double check before you're done. And let me know if you have any questions. This is our video on chord progression assignments.